Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to everyone to day 2. For those of you who weren't able to make it to yesterday's session, we looked at this idea of what exactly is the purpose of religion. What are we trying to do? What are the certain preconceptions, misconceptions that we may be holding about the very notion of religion? And how do we understand ourselves, especially within the Sikh community? How do we portray ourselves? How would we like to portray ourselves? And really starting to take ownership of the very direction in which the faith is going, and the way we do that is by taking ownership of where individually we are going forward. So we really looked at dissecting this idea of religion itself. And it was to help answer a fundamental question: do I need God in my life? Do I need religion in my life? Do I need an organized practice in my life? Mom and Dad, I think I'm spiritual. I don't think I need religion. All of those kind of things that I'm sure a lot of us are quite familiar with. But in order to answer this question, do I need God? We really need to look a little bit deeper into some of these kind of concepts. And that's where hopefully today and tomorrow's session, we can try to work together to try and see how we can come up with our own understanding of this. I will say today that if you do need to, if you do wish to have a conversation with me, please do put your hand up, because yesterday some people weren't able to hear the other people in the group. So, I like to keep things quite interactive. So please do just keep your hands up in the air, and then somebody will come around with a mic, just so that everyone can hear you. Okay, so religion is a very fascinating idea. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to learn, a whole bunch of ideas, history, a whole bunch of rules and practices. And yesterday we talked about a very fascinating definition. An exercise that I like to do quite often is to dissect words by looking at the English dictionary and say, what exactly does religion mean? And we looked at this idea of religion being a set of beliefs, ritual practices, and worship of a superhuman, all-controlling power. That's the dictionary definition of it. And when we talked about it, we said that doesn't quite sound like what I do. That doesn't sound like my practice. That doesn't sound like something that I resonate with. So we need to start looking at what exactly do we resonate with. I always find this idea of interfaith very interesting. And the title of today's talk is Guru Nanak's Interfaith Message. And if anyone's heard me talk before I go any further, the first thing I'd like to do is try and dissect that question. Say, do we agree with that statement to begin with? So let's just look at this. What does interfaith mean? Yesterday we looked at the meaning of the word belief. Belief means to put your faith in something that you don't know to be true. Do you remember we talked about some of that yesterday? So, my 6-year-old believes in the tooth fairy. He doesn't know it exists, but in his heart he believes that a tooth fairy exists. I may believe in aliens. What I mean by that is, I don't know if aliens exist, but I'd like to think that they exist. And I asked all of you, did Guru Nanak, or Christ, or Buddha, or Muhammad, or any of the prophets of the world, is that what they did? Did they come to the world and say, I'm not really sure about this concept, but I believe it's true, and I'd like you to believe it too? And we all agreed, no, we don't think Guru Nanak believed in God. And somebody quite rightly said out from the crowd, we think Guru Nanak knew God, and that's a very different thing. So, does faith now believe the same thing? Does faith mean belief? Is it another way of talking about what you believe? Does faith mean a group of people with a set of practices? Does faith mean you have your religion and I have my religion? And again, we talked about some of these things yesterday. We don't think that Guru Nanak was a person of one faith. Guru Nanak wasn't a person who came to the world and said, here's a whole bunch of interesting philosophies, I have my own one to present. We don't think that that's how it works. So, interfaith could be a nice way of keeping people in boxes. You clearly belong to the Sikh faith. You clearly belong to the Muslim faith. You clearly belong to the Christian faith. And we like the world in that way. And we don't think that the prophets were trying to create divisions that way. We instinctively feel the prophets were trying to create union in humanity. So I'm going to now question whether Guru Nanak had an interfaith message or whether he had an interhuman message. Did he have a message that said, our religion can sit quite neatly with your one, we can sit quite nicely next to you, we won't cause you any harm, we promise, we're the nice guys? Or did he say, all of us, all humanity, are essentially one? Now, to help answer this, of course, you can listen to what I have to say, but let's go back to, within the Sikh tradition, Sikh spiritual tradition, a verse that many of you from the Sikh tradition will be quite familiar with. This is by a saint or a meditative prophet, whatever word we want to use, a verse that we're all familiar with. Aval Allah Noor Upaya Kudrat Ke Sab Bande, Kabir Ji. He says, first, Allah created light, a creative power from which all mortal beings were created. Aval Allah Noor Upaya. First things first, within the Sikh spiritual tradition, we do not hold a monopoly on terminology. We do not restrict terminology. So, Guru Nanak Dev Ji went across the world and he said, this thing that you call God, how would you like to reference it? The people from the Arabic world said, we call it Allah. And the people from the Indian tradition said, we call it Ram. Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, fantastic, we're talking about exactly the same thing. We're talking about exactly the same thing. Because Guru Nanak Dev Ji, remember yesterday, wasn't trying to prove an intellectual concept or a philosophy. Guru Nanak Dev Ji knew a different experience of life. Do you understand? Guru Nanak Dev Ji knew a different experience of life, and he wanted to share that experience. Kabir Ji says, Aval Allah Noor Upaya Kudrat Ke Sab Bande. So, first, there was a divine light, and that created the force of nature, and that created all of mankind. Ek noor te sab jag upajya. From one light, life force. Did we talk about Star Wars yesterday? Yeah? The closest Hollywood has got to trying to explain this thing, and they've done it pretty well, is this life force, the force. Sometimes before I come and do my lectures, my wife sends me a little text message and she says, may the force be with you. And I'm like, yes, she gets it. Ek noor te sab jag upja. From one force, all creation has been created. Kaun pale ko mande. So who's good and who's bad? So this kind of message permeates all throughout the Sikh spiritual tradition. Now, what exactly are we talking about? I think the Sikh gurus, I think the saints, the meditators, whatever we want to call them, the bhagats, whose writings have all been collated into arguably the most interfaith scripture that can ever exist, a scripture that's been contributed to by people of different faiths. But I would argue they all had one faith. Regardless of what their name was, regardless of what background they came from, regardless of what they may look like, regardless of what prayers they may be saying. It's a very important one, regardless of what prayers or what words they choose in order to interact with this force of life. I believe that they actually had one experience of life. So they didn't have multiple faiths. They had one unified experience of life, and that is what they came to the world to talk to them about, to talk to people about. Now the big question is, what on earth was this experience of life? What was so amazing about what they experienced? And how do we go about experiencing it? Do we even understand what this thing is? So, Guru Nanak comes to the world with a new description of an old experience. Let me say that again. Guru Nanak comes to the world with a new explanation, a new way of connecting people of the modern world of his time to an ancient experience that all human beings have access to. What does that mean? Because one of the things I like to do whenever I'm talking is to stop myself and say, let's step back. Let's make sure people are understanding it. And by the way, feel free to stick your hand up. This is a conversation. Monologue, not dialogue, is always the best way. It means I don't have to do all the talking. So, I think Guru Nanak Dev Ji experienced something different. And where the rest of the world experienced duality, Guru Nanak experienced unity. What are we talking about here? I think Guru Nanak Dev Ji has come to the world with a message that the world isn't made up of a whole bunch of different types of people. The world isn't made up of brown people and white people and black people, of Muslim people and Indian people and American people and Sikh people and Hindu people, of atheists and believers. Guru Nanak Dev Ji and all the other people who experienced this said, I don't see what you see. I don't see difference. I see oneness behind it all. And you know what the great thing was? They didn't just see this. They showed us how we could see it. So, what are we talking about? What we are talking about is looking at the universe with fresh eyes. Looking at the universe not through the lens that we've all been conditioned to look through. What are we talking about? You and me all look at the world through the lens of our individuality. What I mean by that is we all look at the world through this lens of I am looking at the world. And the way we look at the world is very simple. We look at the world in a way that says, is this good for the I am, or is this bad for the I am? It's almost a very natural thing. It's almost built into our DNA. This survival instinct of, can I eat that, or is that going to kill me? Is that animal friendly, or is it a danger to me? And this mentality is built into our DNA. But because it's built into the human being, we don't judge it, we don't condemn it, we don't demonize it. But the gurus came and said, wait a minute, what if we didn't look at the world in this way? And again, it wasn't just a philosophy, it wasn't just an idea. They actually learned to see the world through a different lens. Or to be more precise, they learned to see the world without the fog of their own identity. In fact, their lens was clear. So how do we go about doing this? And certainly in tomorrow's lecture, we're going to be looking a lot more at the how. But what exactly are we talking about? I'm going to keep taking this drink because my cold has really gotten worse since yesterday. I blame your weather, it's too good. So, Guru Nanak Dev Ji has now said that the way we're all looking at the world needs an upgrade. Nobody wants the old versions of the software, nobody wants the old apps. You know, you have the auto update on your phones, and then all of a sudden, what were we doing today? We were driving along, some of my friends took me along to see some kangaroos. Come on, that's a pretty strange experience for me. The wildest it gets in the UK is to be able to see some wild rabbits. Yeah, so this was a big deal. Took me along, we're driving along, and all of a sudden the sat-nav changed its voice. And all of a sudden the sat-nav voice was singing. And we're like, what on earth is going on? And everyone in the car is getting all confused, we can't figure it out. What's going on? The sat-nav has changed its voice. And in my head I knew what happened, IT background. There's been an update in the background. Automatically something is updated, something has changed, and all of a sudden it's unrecognizable. It was singing to us, turn right in 200 meters. Turns out there's a setting on the iPhone, by the way, where you can change the voice to boy band. And that was the voice that it had automatically set itself to. Although I think the driver secretly did set it himself, but he denied all knowledge. Anyway, so we are now due for an upgrade. The upgrade is that the old way of looking at life has led to division, war, terrorism, hatred, and absolute suffering. And yesterday we talked a lot about how mental illness is on the rise. The reason it's on the rise is because more and more people are realizing that the outside world is incapable of delivering the happiness that they thought it was going to do. And so the expectations that we set within our minds are not being met. And all of this comes down to quite a sophisticated new psychology, a new way of understanding the self, and a new way of understanding life. So what I'm here to present today is that Guru Nanak doesn't have an interfaith message, but a universal one. An interhuman message. One that applies to all human beings, whether your beard is nice and long like ours, or whether your hair is nice and short, or whether your skin is whatever color, or whether you've got nice black hair like my friends over here, or you're a little bit grey like me. I didn't look at you when I said that. So, how do we do this? What do we do? What's going on? What do we change? What on earth are we talking about? Guru Nanak Dev Ji is presenting an idea that in this room, there aren't 70 different people. He says, I don't see 70 people in this room. He says, I see one thing in this room in 70 different shapes. Just think about that for this moment. If you stand up here, I'd be very happy because I can sit down. If you stand here and you look around, you see a whole bunch of different people. There's that person, there's that person. There's the person I know, there's the person I don't know. There's a person who looked at me funny last time. I don't think I'm going to stay away from that person. There's a person, looks like my best friend from back home. I'm going to go near to that person. I'll give you a really good example of how this works. So, you only have to have gone to a party and met a complete stranger and you say, hi, my name is Satpal, what's your name? And the guy turns around and says, hi, my name's David. And you think, I know a David. David's my next door neighbour. He's a horrible person and he's borrowed my lawnmower and he never returned it back to me. And not only did he borrow my lawnmower, he's also stolen some money from me and I think he's a terrible person. Straight away, David over here is getting funny looks from you and he's done nothing. On the other hand, if you said to me, hi, my name is Harmeet, you know what? That's my wife's name. I'm going to think, wow, you're a great person. What are we doing? What's going on?
Judgment.
Our mind is making amazing judgments all the time. And we are completely oblivious to it all. We have no idea what's going on in the chatter of our minds. And so, we now live within the mind. We think whatever the mind says is absolutely great. I saw once on Facebook a quote that I absolutely love, and I love to share it. It said, "Don't believe everything you think." Don't believe that everything that goes on in there is an absolute statement of fact. Because sometimes the mind just makes stuff up. The way the mind works, and the reason I'm talking about the mind is we're now answering this question about what is Guru Nanak's message. It's an interhuman message. Guru Nanak spends more time talking about the mind than anything else. Why? Because he wasn't interested in delivering a new philosophy. He was interested in showing human beings how you work and why your minds lead you into utter suffering from every single day-to-day experience. So he's showing us that in our minds we're doing all this noise, blah, 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 all the time. And so within that, we look at someone and we say, "Oh, he's wearing a pink shirt. What kind of guy wears a pink shirt?" And off it goes, blah, 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 blah. "I don't like that guy." Right? Straight away. You create internal suffering all the time. You create your own sorrow and suffering all the time. Now, that's not to say that sometimes people don't do bad things. The guy with the pink shirt might have worn it just to really annoy me. Yeah? I think he did. So, we're not really interested in what other people are doing. Guru Nanak Dev Ji says, look, you can't really control other people, but perhaps you can be aware of what's going on in your mind. But he raises some really interesting ideas, which is that why should we spend all of life as a way of creating divisions between people? Why is that the best way of looking at life? Why do we look at life as, those are the people that I like, those are people I don't like. Here's a friend, here's an enemy. Why is that the best way of looking at life? Is it the best way of looking at life? And he argues that it's not the best way of looking at life because what it does is it creates internal turmoil. And Guru Nanak famously quoted, "The world is made up of very ill people. The world is made up of an ocean of people who are all drowning in suffering." We're all struggling day to day. Let me give you a perfect example. How many of us wake up in the morning, and as soon as you wake up in the morning, you're already panicking about something. You're already late for something. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you don't wake up and say, "Wow, another morning, another day, the sun is shining." And you can say that in this country, I can't even say that. Right? The sun is shining. What a beautiful morning. What a beautiful moment. Let me take a moment to just breathe it all in. We don't do that. We wake up and we're already late. Oh, I've got to do this and I've got to do that and all of these things and all this pressure and all these things in our mind. We are walking, talking, living, breathing bags of suffering. And Guru Nanak and all of these great mystics, bhagats, and I put all of them into one category because I think they were all trying to do the same thing. They were trying to show mankind a different way of looking at life. So I go back to this point of Guru Nanak was giving the world a new way to look at an old experience of life. And that experience is the fact that the whole world is not made up of multiple things. The whole world is made up of one thing. Just for a moment, put yourself into that mindset. What would your day be like if every person you looked at, you saw yourself in that person? What would your day be like? Let's think about driving to work. Let's think about road rage. Somebody is driving along and they cut you up. What are the thoughts that your mind just fires straight away? Oh, look at that person. Actually, I won't say what the thoughts go off in your head. But you get what I mean. Right? What about your manager walks into the room? Oh, don't like that guy. Horrible person. Yeah? Best friend walks into the room. Colleague walks in. Oh, not you again. Right? What would your mind be like if every single person you saw was a reflection of you? What would your mind be like? Let's put it a different way. People find that example a little bit difficult. What would life be like if every person you saw had the face of the person that you're in love with?
Harmonious. Harmony. Harmonious.
Yeah? You would be in harmony. You would be in peace. You would be in bliss. And Guru Nanak Dev Ji said, I think that's a good starting point. Let's start with that. Even if you don't experience it in that way, even if you don't know this experience of oneness, what if you just started with that as an assumption? That every person you look at had the face of your beloved. Do you see how very quickly you can start to implement some of these ideas, and it doesn't really depend on whether you know a whole bunch of religious stuff. It's interhuman. It's for every single person. Yes, we have a question.
What if you don't have a beloved per se, or you don't think very highly of yourself? So then, looking at another person as you may see the parts of you that you don't like. There may be no parts of you that you do like.
Okay.
So then, perhaps for some people, they may not be so nice.
That's a very valid point. What if you don't love anyone, or you don't have? Yeah. Thanks for bringing the room down, mate. Look, I think it's a generic example. If you don't have that, we can maybe work out some new ideas. Yeah. Maybe we'll look into that tomorrow. Yeah. Another point.
If I can just add to that.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I think if we do a survey in this room today, 90% of people, I think I can put my hand on heart on it, will not see an appreciative part of the other person when they are reflecting themselves. Because that's how we have become. So if you're looking at the person across from you and trying to reflect yourself, I can bet $1 here, 90% of the people will see a pain or a suffering. They will quickly say, oh, this is what this person is going through, and which is actually he or she themselves. So, not trying to answer here, but I think majority of people, we do not have that beloved or love for ourselves, where we are proud of something or thankful of something every moment.
Okay.
And that's what's missing.
Okay. So let's see what we can do with this. I think you're right, but if anything, I believe that demonstrates my point even better, which is the fact that we are all struggling with day-to-day experiences of life. And most, even basic mental wellness techniques will tell you there's a very simple way of changing some of that. And you've heard about things like write a gratitude journal. What we're talking about is exactly this, that Guru Nanak came to the world to present a new way of looking at life, a new way to be more thankful, a new way to be more appreciative. And I'm just going to go into how do we actually get into that. So I'll take one final comment before we move on.
I mean, if you look at modern psychology and research, most of our thoughts are negative on a daily basis.
Is that right?
Yes, naturally negative. And Guru Nanak Ji, as I think you're going to say, is one thing that we see in modern psychology. I call Guru Nanak the father of modern psychology.
Okay.
Chardi Kala.
Yes.
Whatever you do, Chardi Kala. And if you look at other people who are talking about it, if you smile, even the sorrow that you have when you smile is easier to cope with.
Interesting. Thank you for that. That's a really interesting point. You've raised a very interesting terminology here. I'll take some points a little bit later on, which is chardika. That translates into high spirits. Now I'm going to take it one step further. I don't believe Guru Nanak Dev Ji wanted you to have a positive mental attitude. It isn't a forced mental attitude of seeing the world in a positive light, always looking for the good in things. I think it's far more sophisticated than that. So, how do we now get from this state of mind, which is, I am me, this is how I look at the world, everything that you've said is pretty much a reflection of how my life is. I think Guru Nanak Dev Ji does this in an extremely sophisticated psychological way. He demonstrates how your own understanding of yourself is fundamentally flawed. And your own understanding of yourself is applicable to all human beings. So, how do we go about doing that? So, I've not met most of you. And let's pretend that this has got nothing to do with spirituality. This is a very formal business conference. I'll come up to you and I'll say, "Hi, my name is Satpal Singh. Who are you?" What would you answer? Can I get the mic here, please? I've picked you. I didn't wait for a hand. You're a chosen one. Just here. Third row, sorry.
Third row. They can pass the mic
Yeah,
on.
they can pass it down. So hi, we're at a business conference. Lovely to meet you. My name is Satpal Singh, CEO of Microsoft, Google, Alphabet. Who are you? Okay, nice to meet you. Who are you? Bit closer to the mic, please. Yes. Okay, I'm not sure that mic is on.
Switch. Double.
I'm Harjinder. Nice
Okay.
to meet you too.
Nice to meet you. Tell me something about yourself, Harjinder. Oh, it's not a trick question, by the way. It's just a genuine question. Like, who are you?
I'm just a pupil all my life.
This is a business conference, yeah? Remember, don't be spiritual. It's a business conference.
A business conference.
Right. Hi, Harjinder. Nice to meet you. Tell me something about you. Who are you?
I really don't know.
You're not going to sell much or gain many clients. Who are you, Vijay?
Okay, my name is Jasper.
Okay.
I live in northern suburb.
Okay.
So I work in the city.
Yeah.
So I got 2 kids and 1 wife.
2 kids and 1 wife. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. So I'm working
Okay.
in a company which is related to IT.
Yes.
Because I'm a project manager, runs projects and so forth.
Okay.
Depending on the assignments that are given to me
Okay.
by the company.
So you deal with projects, you work in a company, you've got a wife, one wife, you've got 2 kids. What else? Who are you?
That's a very tough question.
Yeah.
It's not a trick question, it's a genuine question. Let's try again.
All right. So I'm a
Let's move it on. Hi, my name is Satpal,
Hello, hi, how are you?
CEO of Microsoft. Who are you?
Nice to meet you. My name is Bhai Singh, and I'm a solution architect with a global telco here in Australia.
Keep going. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, thank you. And,
Who are you? Tell me more.
well, yeah, I'm just, a normal, regular Joe Bro, just hanging around and just trying to see what's going on here. Looks like it's a good meeting that we're having.
Okay, tell me something about yourself.
Basically, I'm an aspiring guy trying to be, trying to do the next thing after this job here. Hopefully, I can, retire and do something good.
Excellent. Do you see how hard it becomes? This really isn't a trick question. We walk around our whole lives with one fundamental delusion. I know who I am. And it takes very little for me to ask you the most simplest of questions, and most of us start to fall apart. That's a very hard question. And it's not a trick question. I really didn't say that to kind of trip you up. It's to demonstrate a point. So, what have you told me? Generally, when I ask you this question, who are you? Tell me something about yourself. What's the very first thing you're going to tell me? Your name. What's the next thing you're going to tell me? Occupation. The next thing you're going to tell me? Family. Right? So, I am Satpal Singh, CEO of Microsoft, and I come from this family, and I have one wife, and I have 2 kids, and all that sort of stuff. I belong to this, and maybe after a while you may carry on. So what you might do after that is you might say something like, I am a Sikh. So you might tell me something about the community that you belong to. Then you might start telling me about your roles and responsibilities. I do this at work, but I also like to play tennis on the weekends, or I play golf, or I do this, or I like doing this, or I like doing that. And then you might start telling me about some of your habits. I'm a vegetarian. I like classical music. I do this, I do that. And so, what you have demonstrated to me is all the things that you have understood about yourself. This is what you know about yourself. What Guru Nanak comes along and says, Guru Nanak comes along and says, nah, that's not who you are. You're something else, and you've forgotten who you are. And I'm going to hopefully try and demonstrate how none of those things that you've told me about yourself are actually anything to do with you. And I'm going to do that by proposing that if you're going to tell me something about you, you're only allowed to tell me something that's yours. That's your doing. That you did, you created, you made. So, let's start with the top of that list. How many of you in this room chose your own name? Nobody. The other thing that we sometimes try and identify with, as this is who I am, is gender. This is my physical body. Now, we never really go into a room and say, I am a man, I am a woman. We don't really do that. Most of the time it's obvious. Most of the time. Right? But, and it's changeable these days. So, you are starting to identify with things that you didn't create. How many of you chose your name? No. How many of you chose your gender? Nope. How many of you chose the color of your skin? How many of you chose your family? How many of you chose your parents? How many of you would like to choose again? I won't say that about the wife. How many of you chose your community? No? Color of your skin? Race? Yet these are all the things that you've told me that you are. And I'm here to argue, I don't think this is who you are. Okay, you can say, okay, fair enough, you've given all the obvious ones. Well, I chose this and I chose that. Let's find out. How many of you chose your occupation independently with no influence from anyone? What's your occupation?
Number of occupations. I currently work as a counselor.
As a counselor. Did anyone in your life inspire you to be a counselor?
No.
Okay.
I didn't want to be in that field.
Oh, here we go.
I went into the field.
Okay.
And I seem to be working in the field.
Okay.
I was actually in a different field altogether.
Okay. How many medics do we have in this room? Are anyone in the medical field? 1, 2, put your hands up clearly, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. Okay. You were the first one to put your hands up. What's your job?
I'm a nurse, project manager.
You're a nurse. Okay. How did you get into that field?
I was actually inspired by my Buaji, who was a nurse as well, and she works in intensive care, so that's how I...
Okay. Can we say, who else? What's your job?
I'm a dentist working as a dental assistant at the moment.
Excellent. Oh, my wife's a dentist. What? Who or how did you get into that position?
Just landed into it, I think.
Okay.
Not choose yet. So,
How are you guys landing jobs? These great, incredible jobs. Okay, I think I'm working in the wrong country. Okay. The point is that most of us have landed into jobs based on ideas. Like, okay, let me demonstrate it another way. How many firefighters in the room? How many cowboys? How many, you put your hand up? Yeah. How many astronauts? How many of you are doing the job that you thought you would be doing as a child? If the child version of you could pick a job, would they be doing what you're doing? Could we argue that the child version of you was just a little bit more independent, and as you grew up, you evolved your needs based on what society and the environment required of you? Yeah? Because we're not all just astronauts. Yeah? Just because we looked up at the stars and thought, wow, that'd be a cool job. We are influenced all the time. Let me give you a different example. You call it soccer? Soccer fans in the room? Put your hands up, come on guys. Okay, what teams do you support?
Manchester United.
Okay, Man United?
Derby County.
Oh, come on. Derby County, but yeah, it's fine, I understand, because we had that conversation already. What team do you support?
Barcelona.
Barcelona? Come on, some more. Give me some more,
Liverpool.
Okay, Liverpool?
Spurs.
Spurs? Yeah. We've got a few Spurs supporters around here. Okay, so, how many of you chose your teams independently? Liverpool supporter. Why are you a Liverpool supporter?
The stats.
Huh?
The winning stats.
Winning stats, seriously? Apart from this year, right. Let me give you an example. So, my oldest son started primary school, comes home and says, Dad, what football team do we support? And I'm like, actually son, couldn't care less about football, I don't really watch football. I don't support any team. My youngest son says, Dad, if we were to support a football team, how would you pick one? Oh, that's a very interesting question, very clever question. He was only 6 at the time. I said, what I would do is I'd Google it, I'd look at the stats from maybe the last 10 or maybe 20 or 30 years, I'd see which team was generally doing the best, and I'd pick that one. They said, great, let's do it. So we did that, we go online, and sure enough, Man United has been doing pretty well for a really long time. So I said, boys, I think we should pick Man United. Done deal. Turns out, all of my friends and their kids support Liverpool. Right? There's like a Sikh Liverpool thing. Right? All the dads, and they're rivals with Man United, and all the other Sikh dads that I hang around with, they were like, whoa, what are you doing? You don't want to join the dark side? Come over to our side. And me and my boys are scratching our heads thinking, why would we pick Liverpool? Turns out, in the 80s, Liverpool were pretty good. And anyone who supported Liverpool was influenced by a parent, a dad, an older uncle, and all those sorts of things. So what you end up with in a situation where everyone is supporting a team based on being influenced by someone else. So you're not your name, you're not your body, you're not your family, you're probably not your education, you're probably not your occupation, you're now not even your likes and your dislikes. What on earth is going on? Who are you? So, what we end up doing is we start building a foundation of ourselves based on external influences. And the way I like to describe this is the way we understand ourselves is like the way we build a house. In order to build a house, what's the first thing you need?
Foundations.
Strong foundation. So, in order to understand ourselves, what we do first is we build a foundation. And a foundation is something that is solid, permanent, not going anywhere. And so in order to understand ourselves, first we create a foundation. The foundation, the very first thing that we put, it's like a brick. We put a brick down and we say, these bricks can't be changed, can't be moved. The very first brick is a name. What's the first thing that happens to you when you're born? What's the first thing that your parents give you? They give you a name. That's like, right, we can't call it baby for much longer. We need to give it a name. And it's a very good thing to do, obviously, it makes sense. If we were all still called baby, it would be a very confusing world. So we get given this name, and we get given a body, and so I am a boy, I am a girl, I'm a man, I'm a woman. I belong to these parents, I can't change them, can't do anything about them. I belong to this skin color, I belong to this community. And you start very quickly laying the foundations of your identity. This is who I am. And then as we go up the brick wall, we start layering it with other things. I used to be a student. I study this, I do that. I used to be a student, but now I'm no longer a student. You can take that brick away, and now I'm going to replace it. I'm a dentist, I'm a psychologist, I'm a nurse, I'm a teacher. And so you start building all of these things. And then you start borrowing more bricks and saying, I'm a Liverpool supporter, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm a this, I'm a that. And very quickly you build up this lovely little mansion that you call identity. This is me. This is who I am. But the reality is, none of that stuff is actually you. And this is what the spiritual masters, if we want to call it that, yeah, it's very interesting that we put labels on people. Because if you call someone spiritual or enlightened, what do? You put them somewhere far away. Oh, they're enlightened, let's just bow down to them. Try and understand, they're not enlightened. They've just learned a different way of seeing the world. And if we call that enlightenment, then it means that that experience that's happened to them is available to us. So we've created this identity and we say, this is me. Don't touch it. It's taken me a very long time to get this. Yeah? It's taken a long time to build up this identity. And what happens is when somebody comes along and starts prodding at a particular brick, why are you a vegan? They're prodding at that brick and it hurts. Oh, don't do that. And so you start pushing back. Why do you support Liverpool? Start poking. And how many times do you then start having arguments with people? No. One of the weirdest things, I grew up in India, and when I moved to the UK, one of the weirdest phenomenon I ever experienced was the way people talked about their football teams as though they were in it. Yes, well, we bought this player last year and we sold it for this year, and then we did this and we beat you in this game. And I was utterly confused as a child. I was like, are you in this team? Am I missing something? Did I not sign up to something somewhere? And people talk about football teams as though it's them, it's theirs. They own it, it's their identity. It's who they are. So it's like somebody prodding a brick at you. Have you ever had an argument with someone and argued so viciously about a particular point, and then at some point in the future you thought, actually, I don't actually even believe that anymore. That's not who I am anymore. What happened? You used to have a particular brick and you're holding tight, that's mine. And then along comes somebody who says, actually, I don't think you should look at it that way. You say, oh, I never thought about it that way. Here you go. You give your brick away and then you just take their one. Yeah? And then we get very, very proud of it. And we spend all of our life polishing these bricks. This is who I am. And the mystics and the spiritual masters are actually looking at human beings and saying, guys, this is not who you are. You are something far more universal than that which divides you. You are something which they described in this old language as you have a light, a divine spark, a universal force. You have an essence. And that's in you and that's in me. And somewhere along the line, some of that stuff got labeled into this very loaded word called God. You have God inside you. And then after a while, as humanity forgot that what this thing that they were talking about was inside them, all of a sudden God wasn't inside them anymore. It was somewhere far away, and it was an old man with a white beard floating in the clouds. I once made this reference, and I talked about an old man with a white beard in the clouds, and I said, Charles Heston. And most people in the room were just looking completely confused, and I realized, man, that's a really old reference. So Charles Heston was an actor, I think in the 60s or something like that, and for some reason, that's my image of God, because I think in the movie he played an image of a white God with a white beard and white clothes and white clouds. And so, okay. Well, Bruce Almighty, does anyone remember that one? There, again, look what we do. Say, oh, well, it's no longer the white God, let's give God the black one. Let's give him the black face. Yeah, just so that we're not offending anyone. And then sometimes you get people in the room, and I'm sure there's some of you here who are saying, God's not a man, God's a woman. Yeah? Female. Again, what are we doing? You're trying to create boxes of something that just doesn't fit into any box. So, what we've now created is a religion where somehow, somewhere, we call it God and say, oh, we call it Waheguru, oh, we call it Ram, and we call it Allah. Well, forget it then. It's all, you've all got it wrong. My name is the right one. And I'm willing to fight you over it. And isn't that what the world is still doing today? We are fighting each other based on our differences, and what all of these masters came along to say was that you're not different. There's something intrinsically true in every single one of us. And this is the problem with the word God. It's an extremely loaded word. And it's actually a word that I don't particularly like using. Because God kind of has all of those human connotations. When you say the word God, what image comes in your mind? It's all of the things that we talked about yesterday. You think about an external being. You think about something that is difficult to understand. And so, one of the things I like to do is to try and help people understand that we're not talking about some external being. Because people start saying, well, why are you talking about God? I don't know where God is. God is something that's far away. Well, maybe there's an easier way of understanding it. Let's just scrap the word God for the sake of argument. Let's just scrap that word God. Maybe we just use a different word. Let's start with the word life. Do you have life inside you? Say, yes, I have life inside. Is there life all around you? Is life kind of like an energy or a force? Say yes. Is it a force that is everywhere? Yes. Is the life force that's within me the same as the life force that's within you? Yes. And all of a sudden it becomes crystal clear. As soon as we use this word God, it becomes a very loaded word. It becomes very difficult to understand. Well, I don't know where God is, but life, I understand that. Let's try a different word. Universe. Is the universe inside you? Say yes, I think so. Are you inside the universe? Yes. Is the universe all around us? Yes. Is the universe inside me the same as the universe inside you? You say yes. Why have we made things so complicated? This is the interhuman message. That you and you and you and you and you and you all have absolutely the same essence. The very fundamental building block behind all of those bricks that divide us. The very fundamental building block of life itself, call it life energy, call it Jyot, divine light, yeah, Noor, call it a force, a power, is there inside you. And guess what? That is an essence that you can access directly. Not only can you access it directly, you can choose to be that. That is the identity that you can choose to live life with. You don't have to live life through the identity of those bricks that divide you. So you are now no longer man, woman, old, young, black, brown, white. You're no longer any of those things. No more than you driving a different car to me should be a reason for which that I see you as different to me. Or you wearing a different color of clothes to me. That's on the outside. So, I don't believe Guru Nanak Dev Ji came to the world with an interfaith message. Because interfaith fundamentally is a system of dividing humanity. That you keep yourself in that box over there, I'm going to keep myself in this box over here. In fact, Guru Granth Sahib, the scripture of the Sikh spiritual tradition, has been contributed to by people of different faiths. Now the question is, how on earth do we get to that point? How do we get to the point where you and me no longer identify with ourselves as individuals? And that is going to be the topic of conversation for tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm willing to open it up to any comments, questions, and this is a really good time to now start talking about, can we start talking about how the practicalities of this might work? Am I right? Am I wrong? Does it work? Does it not work? Please feel free. Does it make sense?
So just coming back to the point.
Just wait for the mic.
Just coming back to the point that was made earlier of we see negatives in ourselves that would reflect in others when we see themselves as us. I think we see in negatives in ourselves because we compare ourselves with the others. And if we stop comparing ourselves with the others, there's no reason for us to be angry, aggression, or have any negative feelings about us. So if we eradicate that thing, and if we see everybody else as us,
Yes.
there's no room for comparison.
Right, so I think that's a really interesting point there, because I was just about to say, how do you stop comparing yourself to others? You start by not seeing the other as fundamentally different to you.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that you can compare them, is that the very way that in which you interact with someone is you see them as fundamentally as a different entity. Then you can compare and say, those are the differences. If our very starting point is that every single person is fundamentally the same life energy in a whole bunch of weird and wonderful different shapes and forms, and different sizes, and different colors, and different jobs, and different likes, and different names, and different occupations. Why are we starting to look at life through that way? Because we identify ourselves as those things which fundamentally differentiate us. We identify ourselves as, well, my name is Satpal, so you can't be the same as me because your name is something different. Look how it works. Do you start to just feel a little bit weird as soon as you walk into the room and somebody's got the same name as you? Like, it's like, there's this like, your name is Satpal too? Right? I get really weirded out when I see a woman called Satpal. Because in the Sikh tradition, Punjabi names are, what's the word? They're unisex names? Yeah? Somebody comes up to me and says, I'm Satpal Kaur. I'm like, something wrong with that. Right? Straight away, like if you have no problem with a whole bunch of people with different names, and someone has got exactly the same name as you, you don't know what to do about that. There's that little bit of unease inside you. I'm like, are you the same? Am I supposed to like you? Like, I don't know. Right? Because all of a sudden you're being forced to look at the other person as something quite similar to you. Yeah? And we just don't know how to deal with that. Yeah? So I think that's a really good point. Start with the commonality rather than the differences.
I just have a question, and I'm finding it difficult how to word it. We live in a world of differences, which have been programmed from us from day one we were born.
Yes.
The child comes back from school, he or she gets certain grades, we ask, okay, who else got what? And even if we are not choosing the third person, we are comparing the child with how much they got from the previous year, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And there are many examples.
And you put children based on who got highest, who got lowest, and where do you sit.
Could be
So,
anything.
comparison,
Somebody's playing
yeah.
tennis, somebody's playing basketball, somebody's soccer,
Yeah.
clothing, gadgets, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Moving on, different qualifications, different job titles,
Yes.
different price tags.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So moving on, the vision which you are showing here, and we'll discuss that tomorrow. But outside this room, we're going to walk into the real world, or unreal world, whichever
Yes.
you want to call it. So, what changes do you see we have to? Do you suggest we have to start thinking and maybe exploring to actually adapt in as a communal, as a nation, as a world?
Very good question. What changes do we need to start making? The reason I'm following one lecture on to another is because tomorrow I'm going to demonstrate that you don't need to force this. This isn't a forced thing. This is a lived experience. But until then, let's start with the very first suggestion, which is that you start to discipline your mind to look at others as a reflection of yourself, but not the yourself that differentiates you. So at your very essence, we have been taught that you are not all of the things that are temporary. Your body is temporary, your job is temporary, your likes and your dislikes are temporary, your hobbies, what you do is temporary, your identity, your family. One day you're a son, the next day you're a husband, the next day you're a father, the next day you're a grandfather. Even everything about you changes. So if we then start to look back, step back, and ultimately we are the life force of the universe in a physical form. So you have to first identify yourself as that which doesn't differentiate you. You have to identify yourself as primarily, I am this aliveness that seems to be walking and talking. Have you ever had this experience? It's a very groundbreaking experience where you're looking at yourself and going, oh my God, what is this? Or you're washing the dishes or hoovering or doing something and you're just almost having this slightly step back kind of experience when you're in autopilot and you're doing some job or even driving. Yeah, I don't suggest you do it when you're driving, it's a bit dangerous. But have you ever come across this experience where you're doing something that's quite automated and all of a sudden you're just like, something seems to just be happening on its own. And if you don't, there are ways that we can get into that space. But if you have, you'll know what I mean, that there's this kind of stepping back going, isn't this miraculous? And you'll see it with children. It's beautiful to see it in babies where they just start doing this. Have you ever seen that in babies? What are they doing? They're starting to see something's going on here. What is this? Yeah, except they're not processing it. It's just pure experience. You need to start understanding yourself as something that is experiencing this body as opposed to in the body, as opposed to you are the body. And that is how you start to identify yourself as the fundamental building block of life which makes everything. And that thing is what the whole of the mystical tradition and all spiritual traditions is ultimately about. They're trying to make you realize that there's something going on here that unifies all of us. There's something that's part of it all, and they then gave us different practices to get into that state. Whether it was a meditation, whether it was singing, devotional worship, seva, service, charity, whatever it was, and a way to just get into that space. And if you haven't had that experience, ultimately what we're saying is this is a way of very quickly starting to disassociate yourself from all of your identities. Now your question is, well, why would I want to do that? I quite like myself. I like my name. I like my body. I like my job. I like the clothes that I wear. I like all these things about me. I don't seem to have a problem with it. Well, the truth of the matter is, as soon as any of that stuff starts to get a little bit prodded in any way, you start going into panic mode. You start going into suffering. We are living in a world of suffering as soon as any of that stuff is threatened. And the very basic version of that, we call that stress. As soon as any of that stuff starts to get pushed ever so slightly. And the question is, are you living the best life you could live? Are you the happiest version of yourself? Are you absolutely flying in euphoria at every moment of every day? You know, so, no, I don't think I am. I think I'm just quite normal. Isn't that normal? Isn't that what everyone's doing? Yes, it is what everyone's doing. But this is what the mystics came to do. The mystics came to say, I found a new way. And I think I can help share it with you. I've found a way that you can be always blissful. Within the Japji Sahib, one of the opening verses, we want to call it, prayers, whatever you want to call it, of the Sikh scripture, it says, Nanak Bhagata Sada Vigas. Nanak says there is a group of people called the saints who are always blissful. What you have to ask yourself is, am I interested? Do I think it's possible? And if it's possible, can I do it? The problem is, we don't really see many of those people around. So we actually have convinced ourselves this experience of life that you and me are having is perfectly normal. In fact, it doesn't get much better than this. And the saints and the meditators and the prophets are here to tell you, yes, it does. It gets much better if only you would just understand what I have to share with you and the practices that I'm going to tell you. That's what they're saying. Please come follow me. But not in a leave your other religions and follow me. Yeah? Doesn't Christ say, I am the way? Come follow me, I'll show you. Guru Nanak is saying, follow the Guru. Follow this wisdom. This wisdom has all the answers. The Guru will give you all of the bliss that you're looking for. Because, what are all human beings looking for? Happiness. Except the way we do it is we identify with our identity, and then we think that if we just add more stuff to this identity, that's going to do it. Let's just buy a whole bunch of stuff. Let's just make loads of money. Because that's the best way to do it. Here's something really interesting. When you're a child, what are you taught about money? Money doesn't buy you happiness. Yet when you grow up, you spend all of your life earning lots of money so that you can buy yourself some happiness. And this is the cause of suffering. Your very everyday rat race of life is the cause of your suffering. Except the great thing, at least within the Sikh spiritual wisdom, is that you don't have to give up your life. You don't have to go sit in a monastery to find happiness. You don't have to go climb in a mountain and just sit in a cave and meditate all day. You can find it in this life. You can find it. What you need to do is to create a degree of separation between that which you are, the permanent, universal sense of you, and the dividing sense of you. So that's why it really needs tomorrow's lecture to try and wrap some of these ideas around, which is, how on earth do we get there? But if nothing else, we were talking about, look, if you wanted a first step, look at everyone as yourself. If that doesn't quite work, look at everyone as essentially the same thing, rather than looking at everyone as fundamentally different. Were there any more comments? We've got one here. But thank you for that question. It's a really important one.
Thanks for your speech. So far, what I heard is that it's about life is suffering. It's almost like Buddhism.
Yes.
Right? It's almost like Buddhism. And in Taoism, we ask the word sometimes, who am I? The question is, who am I all the time? So because what really has shaped us is the attachment, the look, the car, the image you have. So in Buddhism is how we get rid of that kind of attachment, especially with greed, hatred, anger, that you become showing more of real you.
Yes.
So that's why I enjoy this, because of the similarity and the commonality of all the major faiths.
Because I don't even believe them as faiths. I believe different human beings in different places experienced the same thing. Just the way that they talked about it and they explained it differed. I believe this is a human experience that's available to every single one of you. In fact, I know it to be a truth. A truth, a fact, is unchanging. That's the very nature of a fact. And it's not a coincidence that people from all sorts of traditions from all over the world have said fundamentally the same thing. That there is something, life force, energy, whatever you want to call it, there is something that unifies us all. And the things that we identify with, that which is temporary, is not our true identity. And that is the cause of suffering. Guru Nanak did say very similar things. Now it just might change how you do it and what the practices were. And as time changes, as language changes, as culture changes, of course it's going to start looking very different.
This is just a reflection rather than a question, and we probably have covered it too. It's just in our lives, economics dominate everything. We are taught that resources are scarce and our wants are unlimited. So we have to compete for everything. It's whether as an individual we are competing or countries compete with each other, and everybody wants to grab those scarce resources.
Yeah.
But maybe at the time of our gurus, they were thinking differently. They were probably seeing life in abundance rather than scarcity.
Yes.
So if they are seeing life in abundance, you don't have to compete for everything, rather you cooperate. But that mindset is not with most countries or with people,
yes,
politicians. It's not that kind of mindset.
That's a wonderful point. Thank you for raising
also, we have to in some way limit our demands on the resources.
Yes.
We want and we want and we want. So it goes on. So that causes the suffering itself.
Yes. Oh, that's a beautiful point. Thank you so much for raising that. Seeing life as a scarcity is a surefire way of seeing differences in everyone and prioritizing yourself. Seeing life in abundance. Now, again, I'm going to go back to, well, is that just a nice philosophical idea, or is that a practical, livable experience? Now, the only way that you're going to see life in abundance and not a scarcity is if you don't identify with the survival of the individual. When your whole life is about survival of this body, then you will compete against others. If you understand that this body is part of a line, a chain of universal events that just happen over uncountable space and time, immeasurable space and time, then you start to take a new, almost wider perspective on life, that this body is going to die. It isn't really that important when it does and when it doesn't. You know what the problem with that way of thinking is? Society will say, whoa, hang on a minute, what on earth are you talking about? Surely you're supposed to look after number one. You're supposed to look after yourself. But my question is, where has that competitive nature got us? It's built some amazingly tall buildings and great technology and all those things. but it's not built a unified, happy world. So maybe there is time for a new way of looking at life. That the interests of the whole is greater than the interest of the individual. And we see this demonstrated certainly by practices, is that a word? Practitioners? Practices. Yeah. By people who were practicing this particular mindset. We saw this mentality that they said living isn't the primary objective. Not that they were suicidal or they had a very morbid way of looking at life. They understood the temporary nature of life. They understood this is going to go anyway. So I'm not going to spend my whole life trying to chase after survival of this. And that doesn't mean you don't get a job, and it doesn't mean that you don't feed yourself. It means that you don't use scarcity and the survival of the individual as your prime driving force in life. So that's how you get into that state of abundance. That's how you look at the whole universe and say, the universe is abundant, it's supporting itself. In fact, everything that we need is in the universe, it's all here. But that comes from a detached way of life, and this is why it's really important that we talk about it with the context of what we're going to talk about tomorrow, which is how on earth do you get there? What are we doing? What are we trying to do? How do we get to that point? Otherwise, you're going to be stuck. You're going to be in this point which says, it sounds like a bunch of nice flowery ideas, and that's all it is. But I don't think it was. I think they genuinely came to the world and said, I'm going to show you how to do it.
Following on from Virji's saying about economic needs, there is something that I have learned from people talking about it, that we do not need to actually fight or compete. When we were sent, the plan on earth was already made, and we live according to that plan. But then there's, I think, a difference in the way we view things. Our forefathers viewed it and told us about how you needed to have faith, pray, follow principles, and things would happen. And our Western education, and our industrial revolution, and our need to survive where we don't plant for ourselves, we don't have food that we plant or do things. We have to go out and buy and survive. And where do we get the money?
Dependence.
And now, this is again industrial, but technological revolution. We are now, quite a lot of people are pretty stressed. What are we going to do when robotics take over? How are we going to survive? And it is an issue. In the 70s, France actually said we should work less. The social people in the 70s said that there's less work for people, we should be working part-time. But that thought was not taken over because men didn't see that. And it's a reality. We have been taught that we have to work hard, we have to do these things, we have to do that. Many of us don't even have hobbies. We don't even know what to do with ourselves.
That's a really good point.
When
Trying to keep ourselves busy.
Working.
Okay.
I'll leave it as that.
Thank you. Thank you. Any final comments? Otherwise, I'm going to hand it back. Okay. I'm so pleased. I know it's a little bit conceptual. I'm so pleased that you've come back a second day. So I hope tomorrow will be an even more valuable session. We can start wrapping some of these ideas together. Bear in mind, and I always say this, I don't want you to take me as some sort of leader or somebody who knows what he's talking about. And I think this is why it's really important that we use this as an opportunity to share dialogue, because I don't want you to replace your old ideas with my ideas. I want you to understand it from the very core of who you are, so that they become something that is true and authentic to you. And if what is authentic to you is then slightly different to what is authentic to me, then that's okay. So I thank you for your patience, and I really look forward to seeing you tomorrow. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ